El día del veredicto dijiste que García Luna estaba en shock con la decisión del jurado que lo declaró culpable de los 5 cargos en su contra. A más de una semana después, ¿qué piensa? ¿Sigue en shock?
I think, as anybody in his circumstance would be, it's a shocking moment in the trial. It's a pretty intense moment of the trial, so all of us sort of experience that sort of shock moment. And for him, in this case, I have to say, all my clients, it seems to open their eyes to our system.
¿De qué manera?
In the sense of, where was the rest of the evidence? Where was the corroboration for some of the worst criminals that testified in that courthouse ever? Where was the corroboration? Can the government really bring a case just based on cooperators? I think you saw that in the press all leading up to the trial. When are they going to show the recordings? Where's the evidence going to be? Certainly the United States government is going to drop a humongous hammer down, and we're going to see the power of the US government. But at the end of the day, it was 6 whatever cooperators. It really, as I said to the jury in summation, it really came down to 2, their first and last witness, that in our view had little to no credibility.
Aún así, solo las palabras, los testimonios de estos testigos. La fiscalía siempre repetía, y los testigos también decían, que los cárteles no funcionan sin el apoyo del gobierno, el más alto nivel, sin la corrupción de funcionarios públicos. ¿No crees que eso es cierto? Especialmente para alguien en una posición de estar a cargo de toda la seguridad del país.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. But here's the most important part of our system. How about evidence? So if you believe that hypothesis, that is, what they tried to put forward in this case, that the only way drugs get to the United States is through corruption, this quantity of drugs gets through corruption in Mexico, well then prove it. And prove it, their view is, what else can we do but ask the people who are doing it, right? Brings me to another point, which is what the narrative was of this trial. The narrative was that literally every human being, every member of the government, certainly, and everybody can be bought in Mexico to further the goals of narcotics trafficking. What that means is they are saying Mexico is a narco state, and they are saying that everybody can be bought. That's an insult, I think, to the Mexican people. I think it's an insult to many, many, many people in Mexican law enforcement, and that's the story that was told by these witnesses.
Desde la prisión en Brooklyn, donde está recluido, ¿está él al tanto de todas las reacciones, las repercusiones que ha tenido este juicio? Por ejemplo, ¿vio él el comunicado de Calderón después del veredicto? El expresidente defendió su gestión en contra de los narcotraficantes del narcotráfico durante su gobierno, pero no salió a defender a Genaro García Luna.
I don't think he's aware to the extent that you're talking about of the reaction in Mexico, because in the jail they are somewhat isolated. But of course there is media, and of course we meet with him, and he's able to communicate with his family. He is aware of the statement.
¿Cuál fue su reacción?
We really haven't talked about it very much, I'll tell you. His reaction, to me, I'll tell you what my reaction was, which I think was similar for him, is that didn't really surprise me. As I tell most of my clients, you will learn very quickly when you are arrested and charged in the United States, especially in a high-profile matter, who will stay by your side and who will not, and who will sort of be in the middle or can't, necessarily take a position, if you will. And so this has been a pretty lonely process for this family. There has been few to none who have come to their side.
Durante el juicio, el presidente de México, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, dijo que va a presentar una demanda en tu contra porque él dice que trataste de implicarlo en un esquema de sobornos y de aceptar millones de dólares de narcotraficantes para su campaña presidencial. ¿Cómo le respondes al presidente? Si le pudieras decir algo, ¿qué le dirías? Y seguramente puede ser que vea esto.
I would say to have a look at the transcript, and I did my job. I did what I'm required to do as a defense lawyer. And as I said earlier, look at the forest, don't look at the trees. I think what we did is the government of the United States put up 6, 7, whatever the number of cooperators that they ultimately ended up calling, and we knocked them down. We established that they are incredible witnesses. The jury disagreed. We respect the jury's verdict, but we disagree that these were credible witnesses in any way, shape, or form. And I think if the president were to look at our cross-examinations in total of all the witnesses, including Ray Zambada, I think he would see that we did a great job discrediting an individual that apparently claims to have been connected to him in some way.
Dijiste también que estaban pensando apelar el fallo del jurado. ¿Eso aún está bajo consideración y bajo qué fundamento pueden apelar y cuál es el plazo que le dan para interponer este recurso de apelación?
He has to be sentenced first, and here you can't appeal until there's a sentence. So his sentencing is in a couple months, is in a few months, and then we have 14 days from the date that the court enters judgment on his sentence to file a notice to the appellate court. From that point on, we have about 3 months to file a brief. In terms of what are the issues, we have to go back through the entire trial transcript. I think one thing that people quite often don't understand here in the United States and in the world is that in our system, it's based on the record only. It's not a double trial. We don't present new evidence to the Court of Appeals.
La fiscalía no puede decir encontramos esta otra cosa y ir a presentarla durante el proceso de apelación.
They can't do that and we can't do that. So what if something new comes up where I find that, wow, this completely obliterates one of the witnesses' testimony? There is a vehicle for that. It's just not the direct appeal. We have to bring a separate motion that allows for challenging a conviction based on new evidence. So when we hit that point, we'll consider what all our issues are, but we can certainly challenge the sufficiency of the evidence. So that will certainly be a ground, and we will be searching for other grounds that we want to raise.
Vamos a hablar de eso, de la evidencia que no presentó la fiscalía, y es todo sobre las finanzas, las adquisiciones, los activos de Genaro García Luna después del 2012, después de que salió del gobierno. ¿Por qué se excluyó?
The government's position was that his post-2012 wealth, first they wanted to say he was rich. He was rich, and look, that shows that he somehow was bribed by the cartel or was somehow in bed with the cartel. You would certainly think that 10 years later they're going to try to say we can follow the money or we have a reason to believe that any of his post-2012 wealth was connected to the cartel. We got closer and closer to trial, and it never materialized. We made our motion, which was to say everything after 2012 must be excluded. The government is happy. I mean, they're free to have theory and say, oh no, we think he's hiding the money or whatever. But they didn't prove it, and the court agreed and said, well, that would just be speculation, so I'm not going to permit it. It's out unless you can show that there's a connection between, that the cartel was somehow funding his post-2012 lifestyle.
Sí, pero ahora el gobierno de México ha lanzado investigaciones de corrupción en contra de Genaro García Luna, también en contra de su esposa, Linda Cristina Pereira. Dicen que ella está involucrada. ¿Estás involucrado en defender a la familia Genaro García, su esposa, durante este proceso?
Well, I certainly have involvement because it's happening as part of my defense of Genaro García Luna. I'm appointed, as you know, by the court to represent him in the criminal case. So the answer is no in terms of I don't represent Cristina or Genaro in that on those separate actions. Plus, I don't practice in Mexico because if they're going to bring actions, he's going to need counsel there. First, they brought a lawsuit in Florida during the middle of this case saying that he was rich in Miami because they had some sort of fraud, laundering or something related to contracts that companies and companies related to him received from the Mexican government for security services. They're not saying he's rich from narco-trafficking. That's a little bizarre given that that was in Florida. Up the coast, the Eastern District is prosecuting him for being rich by being a narco-trafficker. Confusing. So I don't really follow it, and I think it all relates right back to what 2012, that evidence that was excluded from 2012.
Una de las cosas que podría pasar o que puede seguramente pasar, es que van a revocar su residencia porque él fue hallado culpable de haber mentido en su aplicación de inmigración. ¿Podría ser extraditado a México para enfrentar estos cargos? ¿Eso es algo que podría pasar?
Short answer is yes. Why? First, he was convicted He was just convicted of a crime. His family are citizens. It's a different issue. But yes, he's a lawful permanent resident. He's been convicted of a crime. Therefore, he would be deported after serving his sentence. So he has to be sentenced. Certainly we're going to appeal, but assuming we can't reverse his conviction in some sort of way and he has to serve whatever that sentence is, the question becomes what happens after he serves his sentence.
Pero estamos hablando de una larga sentencia. Bien, podría ser de entre 20 a vida en la cárcel. ¿No podría esto suceder antes de cumplir esos años en la cárcel?
Generally, no, but that's a more political conversation. That's something between countries that they'd have to have a conversation about.
Una de las cosas que muchas personas se preguntan es si Genaro García Luna tuvo la oportunidad de colaborar con el gobierno. ¿Por qué no colaboró? Y si ahora, mirando la situación que está, y si tenía esa oportunidad, se arrepiente de no haberlo hecho.
I guess almost every defendant has that opportunity, so I would say yes, he would have had that opportunity before. He did not, certainly. We went to trial. Regret? No, number one. Two, as the trial established, plenty of witnesses in the case had either cooperated or not cooperated, and then they chose to cooperate later, after their sentencing. There's two sort of ways to cooperate, before and after, at any time.
Puede colaborar aún siendo hallado culpable y sentenciado. Él tiene información, pruebas, de que personas en un nivel más alto que él, vamos a decir expresidentes, sabían o estaban involucrados en aceptar sobornos, trabajar con narcotraficantes. ¿Por qué no presentarlo? ¿Por qué no hablar?
Back to what I said before, that's an option. He can do that. He will know that that's an option. We will certainly discuss it. But number one, I think it's important to know that if he were to cooperate, any of the witnesses, just like at trial, there were plenty that cooperated after they had been sentenced. They're still convicted. It doesn't mean, okay, great, now your case is gone. He would still, so he can explore those options. He'll do that with me. He will, he's always kept his options open, as he should. Anybody should. You should know what you can and can't do. I'll talk to him about it, and we'll see what's next.
¿Dará Genaro García Luna en algún momento una entrevista? ¿Quiere dar una entrevista? Yo creo que como un funcionario público, alguien al que la gente de México le puso tanta confianza. Estamos hablando del jefe de seguridad, del que prometió protegerlos del narcotráfico, que ahora se encuentre declarado culpable de trabajar con la misma gente que ha causado tanta violencia en ese país. ¿No crees que debería dar la cara, de hablarle directamente a su gente, a México?
I'll answer that sort of two ways. One, of course he wants to. Who wouldn't? For all the reasons you just said. First of all, it's his country. He loves his country, and so he's a patriot, and he worked so closely with the United States government. But does he want to talk and give an interview? I'm sure. I can't advise him to do that at this stage. We have to go to sentencing. We have legal issues we have to challenge, and him, speaking, I think he may want to do that in the future. That's really up to him and his family, but I know he certainly would want to do that.